You don't need to argue to prove a point. You don't need to explain yourself to be understood. In fact, the more you live what you believe, the less you'll feel the need to convince anyone of anything. The Stoic doesn't shout. He doesn't chase approval or try to win debates. He lets his life do the speaking, because in the end, it's not your words that shape the world. It's your presence, your consistency, your discipline, your peace. The loudest philosophy is a quiet one, lived in action, not in opinion. This episode is a reminder. The more grounded you are in your values, the less you'll need to defend them. You're not here to argue, you're here to become. So stop talking, start showing. 1. Words rarely change minds, but actions do. We live in a world saturated with words. Everyone has something to say, and most say it loudly. We debate online, we explain our beliefs, we defend our choices, often to people who aren't even open to understanding. But here's what the Stoic sees clearly. Words alone rarely change minds. What truly changes people, what truly plants seeds of reflection, is what they observe, not what they hear. It's not what you argue for, it's what you consistently embody. Think of your own life. When was the last time you changed your opinion because someone argued with you, cornered you, made you feel wrong? Probably never. The mind doesn't respond well to pressure. It defends itself. It digs in. Even truth, when delivered with force, can trigger resistance. But when we see truth lived, when we witness someone quietly practice what they believe, with no need to convince, it's disarming. It bypasses defensiveness. It invites reflection without demanding it. That's the subtle power of action over argument. The Stoics knew this well. Epictetus taught that philosophy isn't something to talk about, it's something to live. That your values should be visible in your behavior, not just your words. Because when people see calm in your presence, discipline in your habits, kindness in your tone, they feel it. And that feeling speaks louder than any phrase. Let's say you believe in emotional control. You can quote Stoic lines about not being reactive. You can explain the logic. But if, in moments of conflict, you still explode or collapse, your message is lost. Now imagine instead that you stay grounded. You breathe. You don't respond with sarcasm or anger. You simply act with clarity and composure. No lecture necessary. Your example becomes the teaching. People learn through contrast. When they expect you to lash out and you remain still, they notice. When they expect defensiveness and you respond with poise, they remember. That is influence, not through pressure, but through presence. Arguing, on the other hand, often comes from the ego. It wants to be right. It wants to win. But the desire to win is the quickest way to lose your center. The Stoic doesn't argue because he understands that truth doesn't need to be forced. It stands on its own. If someone refuses to see it, no amount of talking will make them. And if they're open, they'll see it in how you live, not in how you insist. This doesn't mean we shouldn't speak truth, but our words should echo our lives, not compensate for them. If there's a gap between what you say and how you act, people will feel it, and they'll trust you less because of it. But when there's alignment, when your actions speak first, your words, if you choose to speak them, carry undeniable weight. So the next time you're tempted to correct, to argue, to make your case, pause. Ask yourself, is this about helping, or is it about proving? Then ask the harder question, what if I simply lived this instead? What if I let time and presence carry the message instead of my voice? Because that's the way of the Stoic, not to fight with words, but to lead with action. Over time, that quiet strength leaves the deepest impression. 2. Be a living example of your values. It's easy to talk about what you believe, to list your principles, to post your ideals, but the real question is, do you live them? Do your actions mirror the values you claim to hold, or are they just decoration for moments of convenience? The Stoic doesn't define character by what someone says under calm skies. He looks at what they do when the storm hits, when no one's watching, when their ego is bruised, when their patience is tested, when their values become inconvenient. That's where the truth comes out. That's where real philosophy begins, not in theory, but in embodiment. You say you value patience. Do you show it when you're interrupted, disrespected, misunderstood? You say you believe in discipline. How often do you keep your word to yourself when it's hard, boring, or invisible to others? You say you want to be wise. How often do you pause instead of react, listen instead of speak, observe instead of assume? Words are easy. Living them is the challenge. But that challenge is also the opportunity, because when you become what you believe, you stop needing to explain yourself. Your presence does the work. Your decisions speak. People may not agree with you, but they will respect the clarity, the consistency, the quiet conviction. That kind of integrity can't be faked, and it can't be debated. It earns trust without effort. Marcus Aurelius didn't lead with speeches. He led with restraint. In the midst of war, betrayal, political pressure, he practiced calm, kindness, simplicity. He didn't just write his values, he lived them. That's why his words still carry weight, because they were written from experience, not opinion, from the battlefield, not the balcony. Being a living example doesn't mean being perfect. It means being committed. It means when you fall short, you take responsibility. When you drift, you return. When you fail, you learn, and you try again. That quiet consistency, day after day, builds something more powerful than any argument: credibility. And once you have that, you no longer need to seek validation. You become your own proof. People might question your ideas, but they can't argue with your peace. They might disagree with your philosophy, but they can't ignore how grounded you are in conflict. That's what the Stoic aims for, not persuasion, but presence, not force, but firmness, not control over others, but full command over self. And here's the paradox. The more you focus on living your values, the less you feel the need to announce them. The more you act with integrity, the less you care whether anyone notices, because the reward is internal. It's in the clarity you feel at the end of the day, the strength of knowing that you didn't betray yourself just to fit in, that you honored your principles, even if no one clapped for it. So stop trying to preach the path. Walk it. Let your discipline speak before you do. Let your kindness speak louder than your arguments. Let your presence be your philosophy. Because when you live what you believe, the world may not agree, but it will listen. 3. Arguing feeds the ego, not the truth. Most arguments aren't about truth. They're about identity, about pride, about the desperate need to be seen as right. And once that desire enters the conversation, clarity disappears. It's no longer about understanding. It's about winning. That's the danger. Not the disagreement itself, but the emotional charge behind it. The Stoic sees through this trap. He knows that the louder the argument, the more fragile the ego behind it. The ego thrives on friction. It wants to be validated. It wants to feel superior, and what better way to do that than to defeat someone else in public or prove your point with sharpness? But what do you actually gain? Maybe a temporary sense of victory, maybe a moment of feeling clever, but rarely peace, rarely growth, rarely resolution. Epictetus warned against getting entangled in empty debates. He said, "It is better to do and not talk than to talk and not do." The Stoic doesn't enter arguments to prove himself. He steps back to preserve his energy. He understands that trying to change someone's mind through ego-driven confrontation usually backfires. The other person hardens. You harden. Both walk away more entrenched, more defensive, less open. This is not weakness. It's wisdom. Because truth doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to conquer. It simply is. It reveals itself through observation, through lived example, through time. And the most effective truth, especially in emotional matters, is often absorbed, not imposed. When you feel the urge to argue, pause. What are you defending? An idea or your image? Is it about helping someone grow or about feeling superior? These are hard questions, but they lead you out of the ego and back to alignment. Because if you're speaking from principle, you'll speak with calm. If you're speaking from ego, you'll speak with fire. And that fire will burn your credibility. The Stoic approach doesn't mean silence in the face of injustice. It doesn't mean being passive or disengaged, but it means choosing your battles with care. It means knowing when to speak and when to step away. It means recognizing when the conversation is a trap, not for your ideas, but for your peace. And sometimes the best way to prove a point is to let it unfold, to live in such a way that your results speak for themselves, that your character makes the argument unnecessary. People might not agree with your words, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And if that feeling is steadiness, clarity, strength, they'll return to it, maybe not immediately, but eventually. So the next time someone challenges you, insults you, or tries to pull you into a mental tug-of-war, pause, breathe. Ask yourself, is this worth my peace? Or is this just my ego trying to feel big? Because real strength isn't in overpowering others, it's in mastering yourself. And in that mastery, arguments lose their appeal. The Stoic doesn't argue for truth. He lives in it. 4. Let your peace be louder than opinion. In a noisy world, silence is radical. In a reactive world, calm is powerful. And in a judgmental world, inner peace becomes one of the strongest forms of rebellion. The Stoic knows this well. He doesn't silence the noise by arguing with it. He silences it by refusing to be disturbed. Because the truth is, the more peace you cultivate within, the less you need to defend yourself without. And the more grounded you are, the less anyone's opinion can shake you. You see, most people are not searching for truth. They're broadcasting identity. When they criticize, when they gossip, when they judge, it's rarely about you. It's a mirror of their own unrest. And if you take it personally, you make their unrest your own. You absorb what never belonged to you. The Stoic refuses that transaction. He sees the storm, but he does not invite it in. His shield is not aggression, but presence, not defiance, but peace. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself often, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That strength isn't shown through dominance or rebuttal. It's shown through quiet control, through choosing not to be provoked, not to be baited into games of pride, not to exchange inner clarity for external approval. It takes great discipline to stay silent when you could strike back, to breathe instead of react, to walk away when everything inside you wants to prove a point. But that discipline, repeated over time, builds a peace that is unshakable, a peace that speaks louder than any response ever could. People don't remember arguments. They remember how they felt around you. They remember the presence you held when things got tense, the steadiness in your eyes when others were losing control, That's the imprint. And it stays long after the words are forgotten. When you let your peace speak for you, you no longer need to explain yourself in every situation. You stop justifying your path to people who were never meant to understand it. You stop diluting your energy, trying to win approval from those who live in fear or confusion. You start choosing silence, not as avoidance, but as authority. You don't need to defend a truth that's lived with consistency. It becomes obvious. It becomes felt. This doesn't mean you become indifferent or cold. It means your emotional stability is no longer dependent on external permission. You can disagree without disdain. You can stand firm without shouting. And most of all, you can live free from the endless noise of who thinks what about you. So when you feel the urge to argue, to explain, to prove, pause. Remind yourself, peace is not passivity. It's power under control. And right now, I choose it. Let your stillness become the message. Let your calm be the argument. Let your peace speak volumes without needing a single word. Because the person who holds their peace in a world that constantly tries to steal it, that person carries a strength no one can argue with. 5. Respond with conduct, not counterattack. When someone provokes you, criticizes you, disrespects you, misjudges your intent, the natural impulse is to respond in kind, to defend yourself, to push back, to match their energy. But that's the trap. Because the moment you react emotionally, you lose control. You give their behavior the power to shape yours, and the Stoic refuses to hand over that kind of authority. Responding with conduct means letting your actions, not your emotions, do the talking. It means choosing poise over pride, strength over noise. You don't meet insults with more insults. You meet them with restraint, not because you're weak, but because you're above the game. Epictetus said, "When someone does you wrong, do not ask what punishment he deserves. Ask instead, what part of me needs to be strengthened to endure this?" That's a radical shift. It turns offense into opportunity. Every confrontation becomes a mirror, not for the other person, but for you. It reveals your triggers, your patterns, your attachment to being seen as right. And when you see that clearly, you can rise above it without needing to strike back. The Stoic doesn't engage in petty retaliation. He plays a longer game, one that values character over victory, presence over provocation, because he knows that real influence doesn't come from clever comebacks. It comes from how you carry yourself under pressure. Think about how rare it is to see someone stay calm when being challenged, to witness someone hold their center when insulted. That stillness commands more respect than any loud defense ever could. It signals that your self-worth isn't negotiable, that your values aren't up for debate, and that your energy isn't available to every argument that tries to pull you in. But this isn't about suppression. It's not about pretending you don't feel hurt or misunderstood. It's about choosing what to do with that emotion, letting it pass through you without taking control. And when it does, you act, not out of reaction, but out of principle. This also protects your long-term peace, because every time you respond with grace instead of attack, you reinforce your own self-respect. You confirm to yourself that you don't need to mirror dysfunction, that your standards are set internally, not externally. And that kind of consistency builds a quiet inner confidence that no one can touch. Over time, you become less reactive, not because people change, but because you change. You stop giving energy to what doesn't deserve it. You stop lowering yourself to make a point. You start showing, through your conduct, what kind of person you've become. So the next time someone tries to pull you into a reaction, pause, breathe. Ask yourself, What response aligns with who I want to be, not what they deserve? Then act accordingly. Let your behavior become your philosophy. Let your composure become your statement. And let your life, not your words, be your reply. Because when you answer ego with example, emotion with discipline, chaos with clarity, you don't just protect your peace, you elevate it. 6. Silence often speaks most wisely. Not every thought needs to become a sentence. Not every feeling needs a reaction. Not every disagreement requires a response. In fact, some of the most powerful statements you'll ever make are made in silence. Not out of fear, not out of submission, but out of strength, the kind of strength that knows when speaking would add noise, not clarity. The Stoic understands that silence, when chosen with intention, becomes a form of wisdom. We often believe that staying silent is weakness, that if we don't respond, we lose ground, that if we don't speak, we'll be misunderstood or appear unsure. But that belief is built on insecurity. The deeper truth is that silence is often the sign of a mind that is still, not empty, a person who is observing, not retreating, a soul that chooses peace over performance. There's a moment between stimulus and response, a breath, a pause, and inside that pause lies your freedom, your ability to choose how, not if, you respond. Most people skip that space. They react instantly, emotionally, automatically. But the Stoic makes that space longer. He expands it. He dwells in it. Because he knows that what you say in haste is rarely what you'd say in clarity. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best answer to anger is silence." Not because anger doesn't deserve attention, but because responding to fire with fire only fuels the blaze. Silence, in the right moment, extinguishes it. It doesn't surrender, it redirects. It reminds the other person that your peace is not up for negotiation. But silence isn't just for conflict. It's for reflection, for self-inquiry. It's the space where insight is born. When you're constantly speaking, you miss what's happening underneath. But in stillness, you hear your own motives, your own fears, your own wisdom trying to rise. That's why solitude and silence are at the heart of Stoic practice, not just to escape the world, but to better understand how to move within it. And here's the irony. People remember silence more than speeches. They remember when you didn't respond with insult, when you didn't take the bait, when you stayed composed while everyone else scrambled. That kind of silence echoes. It lingers. Because it reveals that you are not controlled by the moment. You are anchored beyond it. This doesn't mean you stay silent in the face of injustice or when truth must be spoken. The Stoic knows there's a time for speech, and when that time comes, it should be intentional, measured, and meaningful. But outside of that, silence becomes your filter, your reset button, your boundary. It protects your energy and preserves your clarity. So train yourself to wait, to breathe, to observe before you speak. Let silence become your ally, not your fear. In a world of endless words, let your silence become rare and powerful. Let it speak not of retreat, but of mastery. Because the wisest voice is often the one that knows when not to speak at all. 7. Be firm without being forceful. Firmness and forcefulness are not the same. One is rooted in clarity, the other in control. One says, "This is where I stand." The other says, "You must stand here too." The Stoic knows the difference, and he chooses firmness. Because firmness is calm. It doesn't need to dominate. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand compliance. It simply holds its ground with dignity and strength. In a world that often equates volume with conviction, This kind of strength is misunderstood. People assume that if you're not aggressive, you're passive. If you don't push, you don't believe deeply. But the Stoic proves otherwise. His beliefs aren't loud, they're lived. His boundaries aren't drawn in rage, they're held in resolve. He doesn't force others to agree. He gives them space to witness. Being firm without being forceful means you don't compromise your principles, but you also don't impose them. You don't fold under pressure, but you don't try to crush opposition. You listen without losing yourself. You speak without threatening. You correct without condemning. That balance is hard, but it's what gives your presence real power. Epictetus reminds us, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. And that's what firmness is, embodied belief. You walk the path, whether or not others join. You hold your standard, even when no one else does. You don't chase approval or submission. You simply remain aligned. Forcefulness, on the other hand, comes from insecurity. It tries to control outcomes. It insists. It pushes. And in doing so, it creates resistance. People may comply, but they do not connect. They may obey, but they do not trust. And most importantly, they do not change. Because real transformation never comes from pressure. It comes from example, from insight, from time. Firmness invites reflection. It creates safety. It says, "This is my truth, and I'll honor it." Quietly, consistently, whether or not you accept it. That message is rare, and because it's rare, it's powerful. When you affirm without being forceful, you communicate something subtle but unforgettable. I do not need you to agree for me to be at peace. That energy is magnetic. It draws people in, not through control, but through clarity. Not by pushing, but by anchoring. And here's the deeper truth. The more you practice this kind of strength, the less reactive you become. You stop feeling the need to convince everyone. You stop taking disagreement personally. You begin to trust that what is true will endure, even in silence, even in stillness. So the next time you feel the urge to push, to press, to prove, pause. Ask yourself, is this firmness or force? Am I standing tall, or am I trying to push others into my stance? Then choose clarity. Choose discipline. Choose to stay grounded in your values, even when others push against them. Because the strongest people are not the ones who shout the loudest, but the ones who stand the clearest, without needing to move anyone but themselves. 8. Conviction shines without debate. Conviction doesn't need a stage. It doesn't need to be defended at every turn or proven to every skeptic. It simply is. It radiates through your decisions, your consistency, your stillness. The Stoic doesn't walk into a room trying to be believed. He walks in already believing, and that quiet self-trust creates more influence than any argument ever could. We often associate strength with persuasion. We think that to show commitment, we must speak with intensity, argue with force, convince others that our view is right. But that approach is driven more by insecurity than clarity. The person who constantly needs to defend their position usually hasn't made peace with it yet. But when you are truly convicted, rooted in principle, not ego, you no longer need agreement to feel grounded. Conviction, real conviction, is not loud, it's calm. It doesn't chase applause or demand affirmation. It stands patiently. You see it in how someone carries themselves, how they respond to challenge, how they return again and again to their values when it would be easier to bend. That's what makes conviction magnetic, not its volume, but its depth. Seneca wrote, "Live among men as if God beheld you. Speak with God as if men were listening." In other words, Act from your inner standard, not for outer approval. Let your conviction be witnessed through conduct, not broadcast through debate. Let others feel your alignment, not just hear your reasoning. When you try too hard to explain your stance, you shift from living your truth to performing it. You begin to tailor your message to what will be accepted, not to what's actually real for you. And in doing so, you weaken the very thing you're trying to express. The Stoic avoids this by letting actions carry the weight of his beliefs. When you live with clarity, the world will feel it, even if they never say it. Conviction without pressure creates presence. It changes the dynamic of every interaction. People might not agree with you, but they'll respect you, because they'll see that you're not trying to convert them. You're simply being you, fully, without hesitation, without apology, and that energy over time softens resistance. It plants seeds. It creates quiet ripples of influence that arguments never could. But this takes discipline. The urge to debate is real, especially when you're misunderstood, criticized, or dismissed. But the Stoic knows that not every attack requires a defense, not every challenge is an invitation, and not every disagreement is worth entering. Sometimes the strongest reply is to carry on, undaunted, unchanged, unwavering. So the next time you feel the pull to prove, step back. Ask yourself, am I acting from conviction or from the fear of being doubted? Then return to your path. Return to your practice. Let your clarity do the speaking. Because the person who doesn't argue, but still lives fully in what they believe, that person doesn't need to be loud. Their life is loud enough. 9. Stoicism is practiced, not preached. Philosophy means nothing if it stays in your mouth. It's not a badge. It's not a caption. It's not meant to be displayed. It's meant to be embodied. The Stoic knows this. He doesn't preach his beliefs. He tests them. In discomfort, in failure, in the quiet moments when no one is watching. Because that's where the real practice begins. Not when life is easy, but when it asks you to prove what you say you believe. You can quote Marcus Aurelius all day, but what matters is how you respond when someone cuts you off in traffic, or when someone you love misunderstands you, or when your plans fall apart. Stoicism is not what you post. It's what you reach for in the heat of challenge. It's the framework you return to when your ego flares, your patience runs thin, or your emotions start pulling you in 10 different directions. Preaching is easy. You can learn the language of wisdom quickly, but practicing it, that takes something deeper. It takes humility. It takes effort. It takes failing and returning and failing again. The Stoic doesn't pretend to be perfect. He doesn't talk as if he has mastered life. He simply returns to the practice again and again until it begins to shape him. And make no mistake, people can feel the difference. They can tell when you're speaking from lived experience versus intellectual memorization. They can tell when your calm is trained, not performed. When your words come from pain you've endured and peace you've earned, not just books you've read. And when they feel that, they listen differently, because it's rare, because it's real. Seneca wrote, "Don't talk about what a good man is, be one." That sentence cuts straight through the illusion. It challenges us to move from concept to conduct, from inspiration to implementation, from knowing the path to walking it. So ask yourself honestly, where am I preaching more than practicing? Where am I trying to look stoic instead of living stoic? There's no shame in the gap, only a choice. You can start again today in how you respond to difficulty, in how you manage your energy, in how you speak to yourself when you fall short. Because Stoicism is not about suppressing emotion or pretending to be unaffected, It's about training the mind to choose clarity over chaos. It's about returning daily to discipline, presence, and principle. Not because someone's watching, but because it's who you want to be. You don't need to advertise your growth. You don't need to convince anyone. Just practice, quietly, relentlessly. Let the days speak for you. Let the alignment show. That is philosophy, not as performance, but as a lived reality. And when you walk through life like that, people will notice, not because you told them, but because your presence will feel like something rare, someone who doesn't need to talk about what they believe, because they're already living it. 10. Truth needs no defense. Truth stands quietly, steadily, without needing to be shouted, repeated, or explained away. It doesn't chase acceptance, it doesn't panic under pressure, and it certainly doesn't require your ego to defend it. The Stoic understands this. He knows that truth, like a mountain, doesn't move when someone points at it and says it doesn't exist. It just remains. When you find yourself trying hard to prove you're right, stop. Ask yourself, why do I need them to agree? Often, it's not because they're wrong, it's because our sense of self is still tied to being validated. But real truth doesn't ask for applause. It doesn't require a crowd. It simply expresses itself through your choices, through your calm, through your resilience. When you're aligned with truth, you don't need to control the narrative. You don't need to micromanage perception. You don't need to rush in to correct every misunderstanding, because you know time reveals what words cannot. Conduct reveals what arguments never can. Epictetus said, "If someone speaks ill of you, and it is true, correct yourself. If it is false, laugh. That's not indifference. That's liberation, the kind that comes from not needing to carry what doesn't belong to you. From knowing that the truth, even when ignored, doesn't lose its power. It only waits." The Stoic trusts that truth has its own timing, that justice unfolds slowly but surely, that what is real will always surface, even if it's buried beneath misunderstanding or denial. And because of that trust, he doesn't waste his energy defending what is already whole. He channels that energy inward, into building, into becoming, into staying aligned. This doesn't mean you stay silent when it matters, but it does mean you stop performing. You stop trying to persuade people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop explaining yourself to those who are only listening to argue. You let your life do the speaking, and you let truth work on its own schedule. And here's the quiet power in that. People remember how you stayed grounded, how you didn't waver when attacked, how you didn't lash out or lose yourself just to be heard. That kind of steadiness becomes a lighthouse. Others may not admit it, but they'll feel it, and they'll start questioning their own noise. So hold your truth, not with tension, but with peace, not with fear, but with clarity. Let go of the need to be understood immediately. Let go of the fear that if you don't speak now, your truth will disappear. It won't. What's real never needs rescue. It only needs time, space, and consistency. You don't need to fight to protect it. Just live it. Live it so fully that it becomes undeniable, and when others come around, they'll see you never had to convince them. You just had to remain. Because the deepest truths are not the ones we defend, but the ones we embody. You don't need to win arguments to live in truth. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard by the right people. You don't need to explain your principles to prove you have them. Your life is your message. Your consistency is your language. And your stillness, your ability to stay centered while the world pulls and pokes and provokes, is your highest form of discipline. We live in a time where everyone is speaking, few are listening, and even fewer are living what they say. Everyone wants to be right, everyone wants to be seen, but the Stoics seek something different, something quieter and far more powerful: integrity. Not as a performance, but as a path. Not to be admired, but to be at peace. He knows that a man who embodies what he believes doesn't need applause. He doesn't need agreement. He doesn't need the noise. Because truth, when lived with discipline, becomes a form of peace no one can steal. And maybe that's the hardest part, to let go of the desire to convince, to resist the impulse to reply, to explain, to argue just one more time. But the more you practice this, the more you'll realize that silence is not absence, it's alignment. That restraint is not weakness, it's clarity. That walking away is not defeat, it's mastery. A man who knows who he is doesn't chase understanding. He invites it, not with his words, but with his way of being. So choose that path. Choose the slower, quieter, deeper one. The one that's not about winning debates, but about winning yourself. The one that trades ego for essence, argument for action, tension for truth. And as you walk it, remember this: those who truly live their philosophy never have to declare it. It shows in their tone, in their pace, in their posture. It shows in how they handle discomfort, how they hold their boundaries, how they remain grounded when others spin in circles. You don't need to prove your worth. You just need to live like you believe it. So walk on, calm, clear, unshaken. Let your life become the quiet roar of everything you stand for. And let the world see, without you ever saying a word, that your silence was never empty. It was full of conviction.